Superman may be the most famous superhero ever created, but also one of the most misunderstood. People have said the same thing. He's too powerful, he's boring, nothing can hurt him, and I don't blame them because that's how Superman has been sold for a long time. A hero defeats every villain in second, a hero who can move planets, a hero who always wins. So here's the question: if Superman can do everything, why should we even care? Why is he one of the hardest characters to write? And why do we so many movies completely miss what Superman is really about? The answer has nothing to do with his powers. It has everything to do with who he is. Superman's biggest strength was never his powers. Most people believe Superman's greatest strength is his powers. His strength, his speed, his heat vision, his ability to fly. But that's never what made Superman special. The problem is, for years, many stories focused more on what Superman can do than on who Superman really is. So people slowly started believing that Superman is just an overpowered character, someone who punches harder than everyone else, someone who can solve every problem with his power. But that's not Superman. That's just the part of people notice first. The problem with an all-powerful hero. Think about it. If your main hero is powerful enough to defeat almost any villain, then where is the tension? Where is the challenge? And if Superman can save everyone by himself, then why do we even need Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, or the Justice League? There are real questions, and every Superman writer had to answer them, because writing action for Superman isn't difficult. Writing interesting Superman stories is. If every fight ends in one punch, the audience stops scared. We already know who's going to win. That's why simply making Superman stronger had never been the answer. In fact, sometimes it makes the character even weaker. Superman was never meant to be just a god. Some version of Superman made people believe that he is almost a god, someone above humanity, someone who can't fail, someone who cannot be touched, someone who simply shows people the right path. And because of that, many people forget who Superman actually is. They stopped seeing Clark Kent. They only saw the cape, the symbol, the power. But Superman was never created to make humans feel small. He was created to remind us that kindness can still exist, the hope can still exist, that never someone with ultimate power can choose compassion instead of fear. And that's a much harder story to write than another superhero punching a bigger villain, because the real battle isn't outside, it's inside. And that's exactly where Superman becomes interesting. So, if Superman isn't defined by his powers, then who he is? The answer is actually very simple. Superman is a friend. He's the kind of person who smiles at strangers, who listens before they speaks, who believes people deserve a second chance, even his enemies. He's not kind because he's weak, he's kind because he's chosen to be. And that's much harder to than throwing a punch. People often call Superman a god, but Superman never wanted to be treated like one. He didn't want people to worship him, he just wanted to help, because inside the cape he's still Clark Kent, a boy raised by two ordinary parents who taught him one simple lesson: always do the right thing. That's the real source of Superman's strength, the mistake many movies make. This is where many versions of Superman struggle. A lot of directors ask the same question: what would Superman be like in the real world? It's an interesting idea, but sometimes they take it too far. They make him darker, more distant, more serious. They try too hard to make him realistic, that they slowly remove the thing that makes Superman Superman. Because here's the truth: someone with that much hope, that much kindness, that much faith in people probably wouldn't fit into our world. People would call him naive, too optimistic, too good to be true. But that's exactly the point. He reminds us of the world as it could be. He is an idol, not because he is perfect, but because he never stopped trying to do what's right. Now don't get me wrong, Superman should be powerful. Watching him stop a meteor, fight Darkseid, or save an entire city, that's part of the fun. Those moments matter, but they should never because his entire personality. Because if all people remember his how hard to be punches, then we'll already lose what makes Superman special. Even in the comics, Superman doesn't solve everything alone. He needs Batman's strategy, Wonder Woman's courage, the Flash's speed, the Green Lantern's core, the Justice League. Sometimes he even needs ordinary people, because no one can carry the weight of the whole world alone, not even Superman. And that's what makes him feel real, not because he's weak, but because he knows he can't do everything by himself. That's not weakness, that's humanity. movie. When people talk about Superman, they usually talk about his powers. But the biggest mistake is thinking what his power is what make him Superman. Because honestly, there are many characters who are powerful, but there is only one Superman. And the difference is not his strength, it is his character. Superman can destroy things, but he chooses to protect. He can force people to follow him, but he chooses to inspire them. He can see himself as something above humanity, but he chooses to stand with humanity. That choice is what makes him special. A lot of people think Superman becomes interesting only when he faces a powerful enemy. And yes, seeing Superman fight a huge villain is amazing. We want to see him push his limits. We want to see his incredible abilities. But the best Superman stories are not only about the battles, they are about the person who behind those battles. Because even Superman has struggles. Even Superman had moments where he feels different. People often forget something important about Superman. He was not always Superman. Before he became the symbol of hope, he was Clark Kent, a child trying to understand a world that felt completely different. When Clark's powers started appearing, his life became confusing. His senses became much stronger than a normal human. He could hear things that nobody else could hear. He could see things that nobody else could see. Imagine being a child and suddenly hearing every sound around you, every conversation, every cry to help, every problem happen around you. It would not feel like a gift at first. It would feel overwhelming. There were times when Clark couldn't even sleep properly. He could sit alone on the roof of his house at night, looking at the stars, wondering why he was different, wondering where he come from, wondering what he was supposed to do with those abilities. He had powers that no human had never experienced, but emotionally, he was still just a kid trying to find his place. And this is where Jonathan and Martha Kent become so important. They don't teach Clark how to become powerful. They taught him how to become a good person. They showed him that his abilities were not something that separated him from people. They were something he could use to help people. Over time, Clark learned how to control his senses, how to filter his noise, how to live like a normal person. But those struggles shaped who he became. Superman didn't wake up one day and become a perfect hero. He had to learn. He had to understand himself. He had to choose who he wanted to be. And maybe that's the most beautiful thing about Superman. He is not interesting because he is an alien with incredible powers. He is interesting because he is an alien who wanted to be a human. Because when you can hear the pain of the entire world, how do you choose to ignore it? How do you continue living only for yourself? That is Superman's real challenge. Not lifting a planet, not defeating a monster, but carrying the weight of the knowing how much the world needs help and still choosing hope. One of the best examples of who Superman really is come out a comic story involved a young girl named Regan. Regan is going through an extremely difficult moment in her life. She feels like she cannot handle things anymore, and she reaches a point where she is standing alone on a rooftop. At that moment, people might expect Superman to arrive like a typical superhero, to give a big speech, to solve everything instantly. But that's not what happens. Superman arrives. Instead of flying in and putting her away, he quietly lands beside her. He doesn't shout. He doesn't give a big inspirational speech. He simply stands with her. After a moment of silence, Superman gently places a hand on her shoulder and says, "Your doctor really did get held up." That one sentence changes everything. He isn't pretending her pain doesn't exist. He is letting Regan know that he is understand what she is being going through. That someone finally showed up for her. Regan breaks down in tears. Superman gently hugs her and softly says, "You are much stronger than you think you are. Trust me." Those simple words gave Regan the hope she had lost. She steps away from the edge, choosing to keep living. Superman doesn't treat her like a problem that needs to be fixed. He treats her like a person who needed someone to listen. Because that is what Superman has always, not just saving people from typical danger, but reminding people that they are not alone. And that is the Superman many people forget. And this is why the reaction to the Superman movie was interesting. When people saw this version of Superman, some people were surprised. Some expecting a Superman who felt more like a god, a character who was almost untouchable, someone who always looked perfect and powerful. But this version focused more on something else. It focused on Clark Kent, a Superman who feels hope, a Superman who cares, a Superman who is powerful but still connected to people. And for some viewers, that felt different. Because over the years, many people forget that Superman was never created to be the strongest person alive. He was created to be the kindness. A lot of people say Superman is too simple, too colorful, too hopeful. They say characters like Batman are more interesting because they are darker, and Spider-Man feels more relatable because he struggles more. But maybe that's exactly why Superman matters. A person who could become anything, but chooses to become something good. You can imagine being Batman. You can understand his pain. You can imagine being Spider-Man. You can understand his problems. But Superman is different. Superman is the person we look at and think, maybe this is who we should try to become. Not because we can fly, not because we can become strongest, but because we can choose kindness. We can choose hope. We can choose to help others. Maybe that's the hardest thing about writing Superman. You are not writing a story about something trying to become powerful. You are writing a story about something who already has everything and still choose to be a good. That is Superman. So the next time someone says Superman is boring because he is too powerful, did we misunderstood Superman, or did we just forget what made him special in the first place? Because Superman was never about having the biggest power. He was always about having the biggest heart. So that was my take on the Superman is one of the hardest character to write. Let me know what you think. Are you excited for Mind of Tomorrow? Do you think Superman's future looks better? Tell me your thoughts in the comments.